A very good morning to all my students. I welcome you all to my YouTube channel, and today we are going to discuss about Jane Austen. She was a greatest of all, you can say a greatest novelist, Jane Austen. So today we are going to discuss about Jane Austen and her major works that she's known for. So while we are discussing these points, don't forget to put pen and paper along with you, because it is not possible for me to write each and every points. So there are some key points that when I speak, please write them. The some of the characters that I've not mentioned in my PPT, please write it down. So half of the work, more than half of the work I have done, and other is your homework. So you have to watch this PPT till end, because I have covered very important key points of all her major works. इसके थ्रू आपको पता चलेगा कि जो जेन ऑस्टन ने वर्क्स लिखे हैं उनके कितने इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट्स आपके एग्जामिनेशन में पूछे जा सकते हैं। और जेन ऑस्टन से मैंने देखा है हर बार एक क्वेश्चन जरूर पूछा जाता है। सो please, if you have yet not subscribed my channel, don't forget to subscribe it. And without wasting time, let's move on to and let's know about Jane Austen. So let's start. Okay, points to remember about Jane Austen. She was born in Steventon, Hampshire in 1775. Please याद रखिएगा कि that she was born in Steventon, Hampshire in 1775. And she was a very great novelist, and she was known for her 6 major works that were remarkable in the history of English literature. Now, why her novels were so important and why they were remarkable? Because of the realistic approach which contains the taste of humor and irony in it. तो जो इनकी writing skills थी वो बहुत realistic थी. She has always talked about the different colors of society. When you will see, you will get to know that in each of her novel, she talks about the different colors of society, and her heroine is a very simple, a genuine person that she has tried to write in her novels. So she carries a realistic approach, and so she is known for her realistic approach, and so her works are so remarkable in the history of English literature. I hope it is clear. You should know this, right? Now, the very first novel that we talk about is Elinor and Marianne. Now, this was later published as Sense and Sensibility. Now, you should not forget, while she was writing her first novel, she named it as Elinor and Marianne, but later she published it as with the name she gave it the name as Sense and Sensibility. Now we'll further talk about her work about Sense and Sensibility, but first we need to cover a few points. She was so curious about writing that at the age of 11 she wrote several poems, and she was actually very enthusiastic on writing about her own self and about the family amusements. And these, by doing these, a total of 29 early works were there by Jane Austen, and she bound it into 3 notebooks, which was known as juvenilia, right? Please remember that 29 early works that were bound into 3 notebooks, which was known as juvenilia. Juvenilia. I'll mention it in a description box, so you don't have to worry about. Now, as I already told you, that the full length first novel was your Sense and Sensibility, and further we'll talk about Sense and Sensibility, and other works of Jane Austen. So these are the few points that you should know about Jane Austen. Now there must be one question that, ma'am, you have already told that there were 6 major works that are remarkable, but you have not told their name. Yes, we'll discuss it further and we'll let you know what were the 6 major works that by what Jane Austen was known. So let's move to the very first work by Jane Austen. So a brief discussion of works by Jane Austen. So the very first work that we will discuss is about Sense and Sensibility. Now, this very first work, अब इसमें कौन कौन से characters थे? How this work is about, which is the central character. Now please open your ears and listen to me carefully. बहुत ध्यान से इस स्टोरी को सुनिएगा. सब चीजें नहीं मेंशन कर पाई हूं मैं, सारे कैरेक्टर्स नहीं मेंशन किए हैं, but while I am speaking this story, please note down. Okay, moving to the story of Sense and Sensibility. Now this work, which have a satirical tone in it, where sense is represented by Elinor and sensibility by Marianne. Now before we go through this, let me tell you the story who was Elinor and Marianne. Now listen it carefully. There was a person, Henry Dashwood. कौन थे? Henry Dashwood. उनकी second wife, that is Mrs. Dashwood, she was a kind and loving mother, and she had 3 daughters. Mind you, Henry Dashwood's second wife, she had 3 daughters, Elinor, Marianne and Margaret. Clear है? 3 daughters थी, Elinor, Marianne and Margaret. Okay. Now you will ask कि Henry Dashwood की first wife, and what about the उनसे क्या कोई child था? Yes. Henry Dashwood had a son from first wife named John Dashwood, and his wife name was Fanny Dashwood, and she was very manipulative. बहुत selfish और manipulative थी उनकी first wife Fanny Dashwood. और उनका बेटा कौन था उनकी फर्स्ट वाइफ से? दैट इज जॉन डैशवुड. ये समझ में आ गया? नाउ फेनी डैशवुड had 2 brothers, that is एडवर्ड फेराज एंड रॉबर्ट फेराज. ठीक है, अब इन्हीं से सारी स्टोरीज हमको मिलेंगी. सो प्लीज रिमेंबर दीज कैरेक्टर्स. हेनरी डैशवुड, first wife was Fanny Dashwood, second wife was Mrs. Dashwood and mother of Elinor, Marianne and Margaret. और फर्स्ट वाइफ से जॉन डैशवुड थे. फेनी डैशवुड के 2 ब्रदर्स थे, एडवर्ड एंड रॉबर्ट फेराज. आई होप इट इज क्लियर. नाउ लेट्स सी. सो यहाँ पे जो सेंस और सेंसिबिलिटी नेम दिया गया है, यहाँ पे सेंस इज रिप्रेजेंटेड बाय एलिनोर. ठीक है, मिसेस डैशवुड की जो बेटियां थी उसमें एलिनोर यहाँ पे किसको रिप्रेजेंट कर रही है? सेंस को रिप्रेजेंट कर रही है. और सेंसिबिलिटी कौन रिप्रेजेंट कर रही है? मैरियाने. नाउ सेंस इज अ कॉमन सेंस which have a good common sense is represented as Elinor, और sensibility who was more emotional जो लोग होते हैं, that is Marianne. Now a story of 2 sisters where their father dies. Now यहाँ पे Henry Dashwood, when he dies, they had to go through the financial crisis. While their father was there, they were happy and they lived happily, but as their father dies, they had to go through financial crisis. Now because of this financial crisis, they move on to the cottage in Devonshire, where Marianne meets Colonel Brandon, who like her. कॉलोनल ब्रैंडन कौन थे? ये रिटायर्ड ऑफिसर थे, एंड ही वाज अ गुड फ्रेंड ऑफ सर जॉन मिडल्टन, जहां पे ये लोग गए थे. ही वाज अ गुड फ्रेंड, एंड एक्चुअली इफ यू टॉक अबाउट कॉलोनल ब्रैंडन की अगर हम बात करें तो ही फॉल्स इन लव विथ मैरियाने. ठीक है, अब बात आती है, but she was attracted to John Willoughby. Now, John, who was John? Now, John was an attractive but a very clever young man who wins Marianne Dashwood's heart, but later he leaves her because he was in favor of wealthy, that means पैसे वाली मिस सोफिया ग्रे, जो वो और पैसे वाली को देखता है, and he goes after him and he leaves Marianne. So Eleanor falls in love with Edward Ferrars, but Edward Ferrars was engaged secretly for 4 years to Lucy, one of the character. But later when Lucy breaks up the engagement and leaves Edward and goes and marries with Robert Ferrars, मतलब एडवर्ड के ही भाई से शादी कर लेती है, and there Edward finally proposes Eleanor and they were married. Sense and Sensibility, a very small and very simple story that you should know. ठीक है? Now, what were the characters? मैंने सब मेंशन कर दिए हैं ज़्यादातर, बस आपको ध्यान रखना है हेनरी डैशवुड इनके फादर थे, मिसेस डैशवुड इनकी मदर, फेनी डैशवुड इनकी फर्स्ट वाइफ हेनरी डैशवुड की, और जॉन डैशवुड इसका भाई था. ठीक है? So, hope I'm clear with Sense and Sensibility. If you have any problem, you can always comment and ask. Now, moving to the next story, that is Pride and Prejudice. Now, this particular work was published in 1850. And in this, Jane Austen has beautifully painted the colors of society and the canvas of her story. मतलब इस story के through she beautifully tells different parts of society. Now the story rotates around Jane and Charles Bingley and Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. Now you will ask, who was Jane, who was Charles Bingley? Oh my god, so many characters. Now we are getting confused. Don't get confused, because I will tell you in such a simple manner that you will not forget these characters. Now listen to this story. This story is of Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, who lived with their 5 daughters. किसकी स्टोरी है? मिस्टर और मिसेस बेनेट की, जो अपनी 5 daughters के साथ रहती हैं. उन daughters का क्या नाम है? जेन, एलिजाबेथ, मैरी, किटी and Lydia. Please remember their name: Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, Lydia. ठीक है? Now, when you will go through this story, you will see that how the story takes turn, and these girls get married to the one who loves. ठीक है? मतलब ये जिसको पसंद करती हैं, to whom they loved, they marry them, but maintaining the dignity throughout the novel is the beauty of the story. They maintain the dignity, and this is the beauty of Jane Austen novel. So, there was a news that was flowing like a fire, that a single gentleman who belongs to a wealthy family, Charles Bingley, had rented the manor of Netherfield Park. ठीक है? उन्होंने रेंट में एक नीदरफील्ड पार्क में एक घर लिया है, रेंट किया है. So Mr. Bennet, he goes to him, and he was invited in a ball to Mr. Bingley, and when they go to the ball and attend the ball, Mr. Bingley is also present there with his friend Mr. Darcy. Now, Mr. Bingley dances with his friend sorry, Mr. Bingley dances with Jane and most of the evening Mr. Bingley, जो चार्ल्स बिंगले थे, वो जेन के साथ डांस करते हैं. मोस्ट ऑफ द इवनिंग, ज़्यादातर अपना टाइम जो इवनिंग का टाइम था वो जेन के साथ स्पेंड करते हैं. ठीक है. वेयर एज मिस्टर डार्सी जो उनके फ्रेंड थे, ही वॉज नॉट एट ऑल कंफर्टेबल दैट इवनिंग एंड ही ऑल्सो रिफ्यूजेस टू डांस विद Elizabeth. And Elizabeth finds it very rude, and she was like, she doesn't wanted to talk uh, about Miss Darcy. And if you will see, there is a movie also, Pride and Prejudice, and later you will see in the story that Mr. Darcy is attracted towards Elizabeth. Now इसमें जो main heroine है Elizabeth, she is the heroine of Austen's work, who is very intelligent and high spirit. So Elizabeth is the heroine of Austen's work, who is represented as high spirit and intelligent. Mrs. Bennet wanted to marry her daughters to a rich family. This was basic mindset uh, of mothers, that their daughters should get married to a rich family where they are comfortable. So it shows the conflict between, is in this particular novel, if you will see, there's a conflict between marrying a rich man for money or getting married to the one you love. Okay, so this is all the story about. And Jane is known for her sense. Why? Because she is beautiful, good tempered, and she's in love with Charles Bingley. And same is with Charles Bingley. He is also in love with Jane, and he's also a good tempered man, but with an extraordinary wealth with him. Later in the story, there comes a person, Mr. Wickham, who was an officer in the regiment, but he was, spreading false rumors about Mr. Darcy, and he tries to be close with Elizabeth and secretly flirts with uh, the youngest sister of Elizabeth, Lydia. So later when they get to know about Mr. Wickham, and in this story you will get to know that Mr. Darcy, finally all the false rumors जो भी उनके बारे में फैली हुई थी, Elizabeth get to know that he was not that kind of person, and Mr. Wickham की जो true colors थे वो सामने आ जाते हैं. So later you will see in the story that Jane and Charles Bingley get married, whereas Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, they also fall in love and gets married. So this was all about Pride and Prejudice. I hope this story is also clear. Very simple. So and very smooth. Don't take tension, just go smoothly with all the stories and you will love literature. So moving on to the next story is Northanger Abbey. Now, this is a very beautiful story, and if you see Jane Austen's heroine, they play a very genuine, who are full of virtue and values. They carry good values, and all the dignity that they carry along is very beautifully mentioned in these novels. So Northanger Abbey, it is a story of a young 17 years old Catherine Morland who loves to read Gothic novel. Now, here start the story. अब ये स्टोरी एक यंग वुमन के बारे में है, and she was named as Catherine Morland. 17 years की old girl है, and she was invited to go on a trip with the family friends Mr. and Mrs. Ellen. Mr. and Mrs. Ellen के साथ she goes to Bath as she was invited. Now Bath क्या होता है? It is a resort for the wealthier members of British society, rich people, no? ठीक है, तो यहाँ पे ये जाती है, and when she attends a ball, there she meets Henry Tilney. Now, इस पर्टिकुलर नॉवल में यू विल सी टू डिफरेंट फैमिलीज, एक टिल्ले फैमिली और एक थॉप फैमिली. Now when we talk about Tinley family, you will get to know that there was Mr. Tinley, he was a father, and Henry Tinley, his son, and Eleanor, उसकी sister, Henry की sister. Now Catherine Morland, she meets Henry at the ball, and overall she starts liking Henry because she was really impressed by the way Henry was talking, and in a very pleasant way. So he had a pleasant conversation with Catherine. So she was quite impressed. She meets there Mrs. Thorpe and her 3 daughters, और सबसे एल्डर वन इजाबेला थी, जो बहुत जल्द उसकी फ्रेंड बन जाती है कैथरीन की, अ गुड फ्रेंड इजाबेला. ठीक है. अब इजाबेला का एक भाई भी है, वो है जॉन थॉर्प. तब तक इस पार्टी में कौन एंटर करता है? जेम्स मॉरलैंड. ये कौन है? कैथरीन का भाई. बहुत स्लोली, इसीलिए मैं बता रही हूँ, प्लीज कीप राइटिंग. एक चार्ट बनाते जाइए, यू विल गेट टू नो ईच एंड एवरी कैरेक्टर. तो अभी तक कौन कौन आया? हेनरी टिल्नी, इनसे कौन मिलता है? कैथरीन मिलती है. कैथरीन का कौन भाई है? जेम्स मॉरलैंड. थॉप फैमिली से किनको किनको हम लोग ने मिलाया? इजाबेला, एल्डर सिस्टर, जो कि कैथरीन की एक अच्छी फ्रेंड बन जाती है, और ये आपकी इजाबेला का जो भाई है उसका क्या नाम है? जॉन थॉप. नाउ दे ऑल they were together, जो जेम्स मॉरलैंड है और जो जॉन थॉप है, they were together at Oxford. Isabella quickly she falls in love with James, where John also woos Catherine, but Catherine she did not like John. उसका जो behavior था, so she did not like, and she goes towards Henry. Now Catherine also become friends with Eleanor. As I mentioned कि टिल्नी फैमिली में जो आपका हेनरी है, उसकी जो सिस्टर थी वो एलिनोर है. सो कैथरीन शी बिकम्स फ्रेंड्स विद एलिनोर टू. नाउ हेनरी सिस्टर and they had a plan for a walk, and but this plan was intervened by James and Isabella, because they also wanted to go out and wanted a company for John, that is Isabella's brother. So she had to cancel her plan with Eleanor and Henry. So now, but for the second time, कैथरीन फॉर्मली फिर से सेकेंड टाइम इन लोगों का प्लान बनता है, और फिर से जेम्स और इजाबेला कैथरीन को आने के लिए कहते हैं. तो जो कैथरीन होती है बहुत फर्मली मना कर देती है दैट शी वुड नॉट कम, एंड शी गोज विद हेनरी एंड एलिनोर, वेयर शी गेट्स टू नो दैट दे बोथ लव बुक्स, they both love reading novel. Now जॉन को किसी काम से बाहर जाना होता है, सो ही लीव्स द बाथ फॉर अ वाइल, और उसके दिमाग में एक परसेप्शन बैठ जाता है कि कैथरीन इज इन लव विथ मी. जेम्स को लगता है, किसके? इजाबेला के भाई को लगता है दैट शी इज इन लव विथ मी, बट दैट वाज नॉट सो. Later she apologizes through a letter and tells Isabella that I don't love him, and this is a wrong perception that he's carrying. Till then, Mr. Tilney, father of Henry, invites Catherine to come with them to the Abbey, Northanger Abbey, and she's so excited, and it makes her curious and excited about the prospect of visiting a real Abbey, as she was she was a lover of reading Gothic novels. So she tells Henry Tilney about how she imagines an Abbey as a haunted one, as she has read in her Gothic novel. But as soon as she reaches there, her excitement gets over, as it was quite dull to what she thought. Now she Now you should listen to this story. That she started imagining different thoughts come to her mind, that did Henry's father kills Henry's mother, and when Henry noticed it, Henry scolded her, and soon she was back to normal. That it is just her imagination. So please remember that the question is asked that how the Northanger Abbey seems to be when Catherine reaches there. So it was quite dull. इससे भी एक क्वेश्चन आता है, so please remember it. So तब तक क्या होता है कि उसके फादर को जाना होता है, हेनरी के फादर को बाहर जाना होता है, he leaves, और वहां पे हेनरी he leaves for his house at Woodstone. So after some time, the general, that is General Tilney, when he comes back, he is very angry and he asks Eleanor to tell Catherine to leave the abbey. Though Eleanor did not like it because she is like a friend to Catherine, but she had to tell. कैथरीन से वो क्यों नाराज हो गए थे, क्योंकि वहां पे उनको मिले थे जेम्स, इजाबेला के भाई, और वहां पे उनको पता चलता है जेम्स गिव him a wrong perception that Catherine and he is going to marry. So he was angry, but at last Henry goes and proposes her home. Henry goes to Catherine at her home, and he tells about why his father was angry, and he proposes her, and finally at the end they get married. Okay. So please remember this story, a very simple one. और कोई points छूट गए होंगे, I will mention it in the description box, but I have covered all the points, all important points. ये कुछ key points होते हैं जो हमें याद रखने पड़ते हैं, थोड़ी थोड़ी story हमें पता होनी चाहिए जिससे कि हम at the time of examination ना भूलें. ठीक है, अगर स्टोरी थोड़ी सिंपल होगी तो हम इजीली चीजें याद रख पाएंगे. अब बहुत जल्दी हम आगे बढ़ते हुए एमा की ओर आते हैं. इट वाज अ नॉवल बाय जेन ऑस्टन व्हिच वाज पब्लिश्ड इन 1815, एंड प्लीज डोंट फॉरगेट दैट इट वाज पब्लिश्ड इन 3 वॉल्यूम्स. Emma Woodhouse is the chief character and the story revolves around her. When we are talking about Emma Woodhouse, where she thought herself to be a perfect matchmaker. As recently, अगर आप इनको देखें तो उन्होंने अपनी उनकी गवर्नेस कौन थी, मिस टेलर and Mr. Weston, they got married, and because they were, after marrying they were happily married, so she thought that she have that skills of perfect matchmaking skills. तो जब स्टोरी आगे बढ़ती है तो वो नेक्स्ट सोचती हैं दैट आई एम गोइंग टू फाइंड अ मैच फॉर माय फ्रेंड हैरियट स्मिथ. एंड हैरियट स्मिथ, अगर आप देखेंगे हैरियट स्मिथ, शी इज अ वेरी सिंपल कैरेक्टर, एंड she did not have any parents, and she was somewhat in love with Robert Martin. Robert Martin, she had some feelings for Robert, and he was a respectable, educated and well-spoken farmer, Robert Martin. But Emma, she deletes, saying कि नहीं, Robert Martin is not a perfect match for you, and you see to Mr. Elton. So Mr. Elton के लिए जब वो कहती है तो Mr. Elton mentions that he likes Emma and not Harriet Smith, which somehow Harriet did not like, and Emma was broken and she wanted to side Mr. Elton. Later, when you will see that she have several proposals for Harriet, and she was openly criticized. Emma में एक चीज याद रखना, Emma को ओपनली किसने क्रिटिसाइज किया है, मिस्टर जॉर्ज नाइटले. ना अब इस कैरेक्टर को समझ लीजिए, मिस्टर जॉर्ज है कौन. जो ईमा की सिस्टर हैं, Isabella, Isabella, Emma's sister के हस्बैंड दैट इज मिस्टर जॉन नाइटले के भाई, ठीक है, मिस्टर जॉन नाइटले के भाई जॉर्ज नाइटले, ठीक है. He was a respected landowner and he is the only character to openly criticize Emma flaws. जो एमा के फ्लॉज है वो ओपनली कहते हैं, एंड ही सेज दैट यू आर नॉट अ परफेक्ट मैच मेकर. And the story goes with several romantic misunderstanding and ends with the marriage of Emma and Mr. George Knightley. While making these matches, Harriet was held by George Knightley and Harriet falls for Mr. George. और जैसे ही हैरियट ईमा को बताती है that she had fall for George, मतलब she has started liking Mr. George, Emma was somehow, she was not happy, she was broken, and the love of Emma can be seen. And Harriet tells her that look, you're trying to hide your feelings for Mr. George. So later you will see in the story that Mr. Robert Martin, he sends a letter for Harriet and Emma gets married to Mr. George Knightley. I hope this is perfectly clear to you. Yes, इसमें एक बात याद रखिएगा कि जो इसके कैरेक्टर्स हैं ईमा, मिस्टर जॉर्ज नाइटले और इमा की जो सिस्टर के हस्बैंड है दैट इज जॉन नाइटले, उनके भाई हैं जॉर्ज नाइटले, ठीक है. वेरी सिंपल स्टोरी. इसकी फ्रेंड कौन है इमा की? हैरियट स्मिथ. और जो गवर्नेस थी इनकी वो मिस टेलर. किससे शादी होती है? मिस्टर वेस्टन. आई एम नॉट गोइंग इनटू वेरी डीप, ठीक है, बहुत डीपली मैं स्टोरी को नहीं बता रही हूँ, बट यस, I am telling you the key points of the story. I hope it is clear. Yes. So moving on to the next story. So now talking about Persuasion. Now the opening of the novel tells us about the brief history of Elliot family, who were the landowners and were counted as the respected ones. This history was taken from the recording by Sir Walter Elliot's favorite book, The Baronet. Now, this particular work was published at the end of 1870 और इसकी स्टार्टिंग परसुएशन में बहुत कुछ बताया गया है, पर अगर हम इसकी स्टार्टिंग देखें तो ये इसकी स्टार्टिंग हमें बताती है कुछ a brief history of Elliot family. They were the landowners and they were counted as the respected one. And this history, ये कहाँ से ली गई है? From the recording by Sir Walter Elliot's favorite book, The Baronet. Now, the story is about Sir Walter and his 3 daughters. अब ये story कहाँ से start हुई है? Sir Walter, उनकी 3 daughters, Elizabeth, Anne और Mary. इसमें से youngest daughter जो Mary है, she is married to Charles Musgrove. He is also a very good person and a land owner. Now, अब इसमें जो main character है वो है Anne Elliot, और इन्हीं के around ये पूरी story, it moves around Anne Elliot, where they are advised by Lady Russell. ये लोग एडवाइस मांगते हैं as their expenses were increasing and they were going into debt. Debt क्या होता है? कर्जा, ठीक है. So they wanted some suggestions from Lady Russell. So Lady Russell tell them that they have to lower down their expenses so that they can get rid of debt. So Sir Walter decides to rent their estate, Hilton Hall, to someone. So they decide to rent this his estate, means his home, to Admiral Croft and Mrs. Croft. Now Anne over here is happy that her house was rented to Admiral Croft and Mrs. Croft, because once she was in love with the brother of Mrs. Croft. Now the story here takes a turn and is very interesting. When you will listen, you will get to know how things go on. So why Anne is happy to see Mrs. Croft as his brother, and Anne was in love once, but because Lady Russell that time interrupted, so she has to cancel her engagement with Captain Wentworth. So the story goes on when Frederick returns back. When Frederick returns, become friends with Mr. Charles. मिस्टर चार्ल्स कौन है? चार्ल्स मसग्रूव, जो मैरी के हस्बैंड है. ही बिकम्स फ्रेंड विद चार्ल्स. एंड फेडरिक का जो अटेंशन था वो लुइसा और हेनरिटा, जो कि चार्ल्स की यंगर सिस्टर है, उनके ऊपर था. ठीक है, which was where Anne did not interrupt it, but she was seeing. But when you will see in the story that Louisa, she gets engaged to Captain Benwick, and Herita to Charles Hayter, the cousin of Musgrove. So you will see that Anne, she was by her father, Mr. Walter. He chose a husband for Anne, that is Mr. William Elliot, because he was in a search of a new bride, as his first wife, she died early, and because he lost his wife, he was under, he was very sad, and he was in search of new bride. But later Anne gets to know by her friend Miss Smith that Mr. William have an eye on Mr. Walter's Kilchen Hall. He wants to be heir of Kilchen Hall, and he's trying. So he wants to marry Anne. When Anne gets to know about his true colors, so later you will see that she refuses to marry Mr. William Elliot, and Frederick again proposes Anne, as Anne is very happy to receive a love letter from Captain Frederick. अच्छा, एक बात है, कैप्टन फेडरिक को पहले लोग ने एक्सेप्ट क्यों नहीं किया था? Because they think his salary, his status was not up to date, and he was not socially acceptable. But later Mr. Frederick, when he shows his salary and the status, he has maintained his status. So finally Mr. Walter and Lady Russell accepts him socially, and they were happy that Anne was getting married to Mr. Frederick. Hope it is clear. Mr. Frederick is the main part of this story. Admiral Croft and Mrs. Croft. Mrs. Croft का भाई कौन था? Frederick. ठीक है, Anne was in love with Frederick. बाकी सब बीच के characters हैं, right? Now moving on to the next story, that is Mansfield Park. Now this particular story shows three different colors of society, very beautifully portrayed by Jane Austen. The very first part is Bertram's the aristocratic one, high class Bertrams, then the sophisticated Crawfords, and the poor Prices. ये particular story है Fanny Price की, who belongs to a poor family, but she was 9 years old. Now listen to this story very carefully. Fanny Price was 9 years old when she was sent to Bertram's house, to his uncle and aunt, Mr. and Mrs. Bertrams. Why? Because Fanny की family के पास इतना, they were so poor that आगे Fanny को पढ़ाना and Fanny को पालना, it was not possible for them, so they have sent Fanny to Bertram's family. When she comes to the Mansfield Park, to Bertram's, everyone ill-treated him, but there was only one person who treated him very kindly. That is the youngest son of veteran Edmund, and he was with a close friendship with Fanny. याद रखना, एडमुंड जो उनका यंगेस्ट सन था वही था जो उसका अच्छा फ्रेंड था, बाकी सब उसको इल ट्रीट करते थे. ठीक है. सो looking at the story, you will get to know that Fanny goes through many ups and downs in her life. She started loving Edmund, but she did not express her feeling because she realizes that Edmund जो था, he loves Mary Crawford, who belonged to a sophisticated family. And Mary Crawford का एक भाई था, Henry Crawford, and he wanted to marry Fanny, but she refuses it as she was in love with Edmund. She did not like Henry and she doesn't wanted to marry. तो उनके जो अंकल होते हैं मिस्टर बेटराम, वो उसको उसके घर वापस भेज देते हैं, just in order to tell her that you belong to a poor family and you are getting a chance by marrying to Henry, that you can go to a good house and you can be rich, and when you will go back your home you will see the poor condition, तब तुमको समझ में आएगा and फिर तुम रिफ्यूज नहीं कर पाओगे हेनरी क्रॉफोर्ड से मैरी करने के लिए. पर जब हेनरी फिर से उसके पास जाता है, शी अगेन रिफ्यूजेस. नाउ हियर इज द ब्यूटी ऑफ द स्टोरी. व्हाई? Because she sticks to her value and refuses to marry Henry Crawford, who belongs to a sophisticated family, and secondly she was also in love with Edmund. ठीक है. So at last you will see that the true love that is shown by her, and as she remains true to her value, wins love of Edmund and everyone at Mansfield Park, which is the beauty of this novel. So I hope it is clear. बहुत clearly मैंने आपको बता दिया है कौन कौन characters थे. अब इनके अनफिनिश्ड वर्क याद रखिएगा जेन ऑस्टन के, द वॉटसन एंड द सैंडिटन. वेरी इजी. इनके अनफिनिश्ड वर्क जो कि ये पूरा नहीं कर पाई एज शी डाइड, द वॉटसन एंड सैंडिटन. सो दिस वाज ऑल अबाउट जेन ऑस्टन. आई नो दिस वीडियो थोड़ा सा बड़ा हो गया है, बट आई हैव कवर्ड ऑल हर वर्क्स. सो wait till next class. We'll see you in the next class. Thank you. See you.